Welcome to the channel. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Now, what have I got in store for the watches today? I've got a watch from Proxima. It's a brand new watch. It's something which I haven't reviewed on the channel before, but it isn't a brand new release from Proxima. They have had it out a good while, and I did bring it up in one of the sales videos a good while ago. Let's have a quick look, get outside the box, and I've not wasted time on the unwrapping, etc. It's all been done, so I can get straight into the review. Is there anything else underneath? Oh yes, Proxima have started to include a couple of things now which they never did before. Link removal tool, spring bar removal tool, and as always the warranty card and a little instruction manual. Let's have a look at this gorgeous and funky looking watch from Proxima. Now this is the Proxima PX01. You know, we have seen this case shape before, but the main thing about this watch is of course the dial and the bezel and how different this looks. Now this is one thing I highly rate about Proxima, is the fact that they are willing to think outside of this homage box while remaining in the box, because these are still homage watches. They're very familiar with what we see from the actual brands that produce these, but they do think differently. They show strokes of genius, and the first time I saw it was when I reviewed this Proxima tuner, and I saw the NH36 mechanism and how they modified it. You know, they've put the date ring on the inside, slightly changed it with the date function, changed the color disc, made it illuminated. So it was a very good attempt from Proxima to do something different, and they have accomplished this on this dial just so much better. I am going to focus on the dial and the function of the dial more so than anything. Everything else is you know, pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's not something that we haven't seen before, so hopefully this review should be concise and focus on what is important. So let's cover dimensions and specifications before we decide to move any further. So let's start off with the price. Now you can get this from the Proxima official store for around £186 or approximately $260. Now Proxima, and this is quite important here, have just recently started adding different movements. So they've got the PT5000 and they also have the SW200 Swiss movement. The PT5000, as you guys know, is a clone of the ETAs, and the SW200 is a Swiss made variant or clone of the ETA movement as well. I will leave a link to the store in the description. Obviously those movements have a higher price, but here I have the NH35, which is the cheapest option. Specifications: you have a double dome sapphire crystal, a bubble glass sapphire crystal albeit, you've got a full 316L stainless steel case construction, crown, bezel, bracelet, and you also have a sapphire bezel inset which is illuminated and a 120 click unidirectional diving bezel. The watch, as mentioned, runs the NH35 movement from Seiko Epson, which beats at 21,600 vibrations per hour, comes with a hacking and winding function with a date complication. Very accurate watch, to be honest, very cheap, easy to replace, which they are selling to every man and their dog, and that's why I think we're all getting a bit bored of it. But however, it is a solid movement. And the watch comes with 200 meters of water resistance. Dimensions: so as mentioned, it is very similar to the 62 mass homage dimensions that we see from Heimdallr, from San Martin, from Proxima. You have a 40 mil case diameter, you have a 15 mil case thickness, and a lug to lug of 48 millimeters. So it's good for starting at a 6.5 inch wrist all the way up, you know, to 8, 9, etc. The weight of the watch is around 185 grams, so it has very decent weight. Now Proxima have not gone with their usual style of dial. I absolutely love their Seiko homages. I love the dials they use, all applied indices, you know, top quality stuff. However, they haven't gone with anything applied on the dial in terms of hour markers, chapter rings, etc. and logo. So the logo is printed. So just below the 12, you'll see Proxima towards the center of the dial. Just below that, you got 200 meter cycle. Don't know why it says cycle, but around the dial you'll see stick-like printed hour markers. In between you've got this funky style of minute markers just in between, and at the 12 you've got a, you know, a Seiko-like dual baton that you find on their dials, but it has been printed. So the dial is strange, it is funky looking, and I believe they have a meteorite version of this which actually looks at this world. So you know, it is very different to what we're used to seeing. Now the main thing about this dial is that concentric circle that you see here, where you've got the date printed around the center. Now they have with this made the date function go around the center, where that pointer that you see at the 12 actually rotates, and that indicates the date. We'll look at that just shortly. Now, looking at the hands, you see Proxima's usual application. They use top quality parts. You know, with my modding background, I have taken a lot of Proxima's watches apart, Heimdallr, SteelDive, etc. And I do know which brand actually uses really good quality parts. Now, Proxima do use high spec dials, hands, etc. And the way you know that is just look at the amount of machining gone into these hands. You've got, I'd say, not even semi, just, you know, touch skeletonized hour hand and a minute hand. However, just look at the polishing, the chamfering present on the hand. Now, of course, this adds money when they machine these hands in that certain way. And just look at the minute hand. Machined really, really well, polished really well, and I just love chamfered hands. They add just so much detail to the dial, and you know, the light play, light does bounce off them really, really well. Now you have a flat second hand with the arrowhead. Now, one thing about the hands I want you to notice is just look at the length of these hands, the proportions. So the hour hand goes to the center, which is not unusual, but what I do love is the minute hand extends almost all the way to the minute track, and the seconds hand, just how I like it, touches that minute track perfectly. Now, they've done it really well with this bubble sapphire crystal, and I believe it's not accidental. They could have put a flat one in there, but what it does, it creates a really funky distortion. So if you lift it up, you can just see the hour markers, and you look at different angles, you do get a lot of distortion around there, a lot of vintage distortion, should I add, because this is quite a vintage style to put this box style sapphire crystal. Now let's go back to the date function and let's see how that works. One click for the date and just check that out. And I really do love this. It does not affect the symmetry of the dial. Yes, it makes it a little busier, but I think coupled with, you know, the hour markers and the way they are, I believe, in my personal opinion, it actually suits it just right. You know, you don't have any cutouts on the dial, so you know, it makes it look, how can I say, it just goes together well, in my opinion anyway. Let's just fully hack it and change the hands. Yeah, that's fine. Crown function is very smooth, and I think one thing which does stand out with Proxima, functionally they are superb. Everything fits and feels good and solid. Just have a look at the crown quickly. They've got this funky sign crown here, and what I never get with Proxima is why they keep changing branding and logos. You just don't know what they are. I think it's difficult enough for a Chinese brand to establish themselves. You know, I actually really like the name Proxima. Not everyone will agree, however, you know, it rolls off the tongue really well. It's very easy to say, you know, and it sounds cool almost. But this logo, I don't get what that is all about. Talking about logos, let's go to the Caseback, and you'll also see they've started to go with this stingray manta ray logo on the Caseback. And they used to have a dolphin. Can't get this to focus. There we go. The Caseback's quite nice. It's polished, but you've got PX01, model number 316Al. Let's get some focus. Sapphire crystal. But you do have something here which I don't like, limited edition. I don't think it's limited edition. I don't think there's a number on there. So it is quite laughable because it simply isn't true. I would have preferred if they went with special edition. That's something absolutely fine. I think there's just too much shine on the Caseback, so I'm not getting enough zoom. But going back, that is the most fantastic thing about the watch. That is the most different thing. As I mentioned, the case is very similar. They also do the RS65 homage, and they use the same case setup, but they have changed the bezel, dial, etc. on that watch as well. So it is very interesting. I do really like what they've done, and that is credit to Proxima. I believe they are taking some steps in the right direction. So let's look at the bezel. A very vintage style bezel insert, nice and thin. So you've got some numbers around the 15, 30, 45, and you've got these off-white, almost very pale yellow, and outer and inner circle around the bezel. Now, I mentioned this is sapphire. I am very interested in seeing how good the lume is on the watch. To date, Proxima have never let me down on the lume. Let's have a quick look. Wow, I must say that is stunning in the lume department. So you've got illuminated lines around the bezel. You've got the markers which are lumed. You've got the numbers which are lumed. That is a sight, I have to say. Looking at the hands, very bright. Down to the seconds hand, and look at the dial, just slightly duller, but looking at the dial, it was quite flat. The lume application couldn't have been many layers, but it is C3. Just to have a look at the date, the text, 200 meters, even the date pointer is illuminated. Let's just have a look at that. Yeah, you can see that rotating. It does look really fantastic. And that distortion on the crystal. Now you can tell I've had it for about a minute or so. The dial is starting to dull down. So as mentioned, the lume on the dial isn't very bright, but the bezel and the hands does really stand out, and you will have some really decent longevity. Wow, so that lume shot was fantastic. I did not expect it. I know Proxima do amazing lume, and they've done some really funky things in the past, but that was really nice. Now let's go across and look at the bezel. So 120 click unidirectional bezel. Alignment seems to be spot on. No playback, very solid bezel, but I will say, as you guys can probably tell, it was a bit difficult. The bezel is very thin, and you know, even though it's been finished really well, it's too smooth still. That the teeth need to be a bit sharper, or the shape needs to be a bit different to give you that grip. Grip isn't that nice, but I understand they've gone for a certain aesthetic here, maybe a vintage aesthetic where the bubble crystal really does stand out and the bezel is nice and slim. It's a good rotation, but difficult to rotate because you just can't get that grip. So yeah, it is a bit useless really. Okay, so good, but just too slippery. It needs a lot more grip. Case, and there's not much to really say. It is quite a basic case. You've got circular brushing around the A face. The sides are hyper polished, as I like to call it, extremely polished to the point I think even a cloth as soft as this can mark it if you're not too careful. So very strong mirror polish, and that's it really. Caseback we've looked at. The end links bracelet. So the bracelet side of things, quite a chunky bracelet, but again, it is the same bracelet that you find on the MM300 homage minus the end links. The end links have been made for this watch, and the fit and finish is absolutely beautiful. It's all one solid link, but it gives the effect of a triple link. But they do have these highlights on either side of the center link, fully brushed, very smooth and high quality brushing. You do have a milled clasp with 3 micro adjusts, so have a look at that. And you've got split pins that hold this bracelet together, and the links, as you can tell, they are quite long. You do have a slight taper from 20mm down to an 18, but the end links, very well done, good fit and finish. Plus you've also got drilled lugs, so bracelet changes, strap changes will be very easy. I will try a different bracelet on this because I've got that 20mm beads of rice. Let's see how this looks on that. Let's check it out. Yes, on the beads of rice, and I think it suits the watch. I think it suits the aesthetic. You know, it is trying to be quite vintage with a thin bezel insert, smaller, slimmer bezel. Yeah, I've really got to get this back up. But yeah, that looks good. Let's put this on the wrist. So the Proxima tuner, I have furnished it with the Heimdall tuner bracelet. I love the taper on the lugs. I love how they fit. That's a good bracelet. Let's put this down. put it on. Yeah, I think that looks a lot better. Gives a really vintage look. Very old school, bubble crystal, this funky dial, thin bezel, and of course on top, this awesome beads of rice. Yeah, I like the look of it. Quite a lot like this. Okay, now time to summarize. Let's talk about the negatives. A couple for me. Of course, the bezel is good, the rotation is perfect, but it's just quite thin, hard to grip, so that does affect functionality. Secondly, I think 15mm is a touch too thick, especially when it's trying to be so thin. I would have preferred it to be about 13.5mm. Now, they can possibly do something about that by taking off the chunk at the bottom, but I don't know how much they want to invest in improving this or upgrading it. Other than that, the original bracelet, they've already used it on a couple of watches, and that brings me on to a constructive critical point with Proxima is they use the same cases and they use the same bracelets on a lot of models, but what they focus on is just a shed load of variants, which is not always a good thing. I think it makes you spoil for choice, and I think they are wasting a lot of money in the wrong direction. When it comes to the MM300, they've got countless variants now. With most of the watches, the tuners, again, countless variants. With this case, countless variants again, countless bezel insert options, countless dial options. The branding is a mess. Proxima, then it's Unidiver, the Unicorn, which, the color options look crazy, and some of them do look really good. But then that Unicorn, not a big fan of it. The branding, they can't get it right. But the quality is there, the build quality is there, the functionality is awesome. The way they build the watches, there's some real thought gone into it from a technical point of view. But it's just everything that I said. They need to really spend more time and money on different cases, different bracelets possibly, and just some different designs also, but not really waste the effort into 500 different variants of the same watch. But yeah, that is my overview of the watch. I hope you guys like the review. If you are interested in buying this watch, then I will leave a link in the description. The bracelet, I don't have a link for this yet. I mentioned in one of my previous videos, I am sourcing a supplier, and these bracelets will be available in not too distant future. I've just got a few samples in, but I really do like the quality of the bracelets. So, stay in touch. If you want to get in touch as well, also, please join the Facebook group for the channel. I will leave that link in the description. Everyone is welcome to join. And that's that, and I'll see you guys on the next review.